And David Kahn, who is the Executive Director of the museum, joins us now. Welcome, it's nice to see you.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
This is quite a summer for you.
It is. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary. We're opening a great big new exhibit, and we changed the name of the institution.
And why did you do that? Why have the new look and the new name?
Some of our exhibits needed updating. They tended to be based on an old model where basically you would look and read, and we wanted to change things up and reach out to contemporary audiences and install more hands-on interactive experiences, video, soundscapes, things that would engage contemporary visitors with the Adirondack story.
Were you finding that the millennials of today, the younger millennials, the older millennials who are now parents, the Gen Zers who have grown up with a screen in their hand or always close by, that you had to make those changes for them?
Well, in a way, yeah. I'll tell you a funny story, and this is a real story. We had an exhibit on quilts up a number of years ago, and in front of the quilts, the staff had installed these sort of interpretive rails that told the story, had the text. And in front of each quilt, there was actually a piece of quilt, a little square that was stuffed with cotton wadding. And the idea was that people were supposed to touch it and see what quilts felt like. And it said, "Please touch." So the staff was in the gallery one day, and there was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, and they saw her going like this with the quilt, with the piece of quilt. And it wasn't doing anything. And so we thought, gee, this is interesting. It said, "Please touch," and her idea of what that was going to result in was very different from what ours was. So I think we're trying to bring the museum into the 21st century and in sync with what's been happening in history museums elsewhere in the U.S.
And for generations, it was always don't touch, look,
yeah,
appreciate, and now...
Yeah, which creates some tension on occasion, because we do have all these touchscreen computers everywhere in the exhibit. We have hands-on activities for the kids. We have a log jam breakup activity where everyone's given a poll and they get to break up a virtual log jam, or they sit in a guide boat and learn how to row a guide boat. And so people are used to touching things, and sometimes they touch things they're not supposed to in the exhibit. We have a 1970s station wagon on display as an example of the kind of vehicle that people used to drive up the Northway to the Adirondacks years ago. And so we found a visitor sitting in there the other day for his own little photo op. Now, we hadn't planned on that one, but it was sort of interesting, so now we lock the doors on the station wagon. So it's an interesting experience trying to indicate to folks, what they can touch and what we'd prefer that they not.
And Life in the Adirondacks is the new major exhibit.
Correct.
And that, it's a huge
huge, absolutely.
19,000 square feet.
Yep.
It has some of the pieces that folks will recognize and remember.
Yep.
The passenger train, stagecoaches, and like that, but there are a lot of new pieces to it.
Yep, absolutely. There's actually relatively few items that people will have seen before. As you mentioned, there is this 19th century railroad car, and that was very funny. The building was built around it, so that set certain parameters as we thought about the future. But it was funny, when we first sat down with our design team, I said to them, about that railroad car? And the head of design said, "It's staying where it is." And I said, "Well, I understand that, but is there a possibility that maybe it could be shifted 45 degrees? He said, "It's staying where it is." Sure. So it's stayed where it is. But other than those few artifacts, there are all sorts of new items in the exhibit. One of the really spectacular ones is Anne Lebastile's cabin. She was a famous conservationist and environmentalist, and we were able to get her cabin as a gift from the estate. And so we dismantled it log by log, hauled it over the ice in the wintertime, and reconstructed it in the museum. So that's an exciting artifact people will see. And another really whole area that is new for the museum, we have a great big section on the history of the Mohawk and the Abenaki. And we've never told that story before at the museum. So that is an exciting change for us. For the Mohawk and the Abenaki, and we think our visitors as well. We've heard from our visitors for years and years and years that they wanted to learn more about Indians, and so now we're finally telling that story.
The museum has always had a wealth of collections, everything from artwork to photographs to maps to artifacts through the centuries. The new Life in the Adirondacks exhibit, does it scale back the number of collectibles that are out there? Have you done that intentionally?
Well, I think in this exhibit, yes, to some extent. So we weren't deliberately going about the idea of scaling back, but we wanted to make sure that there was more of a balance between experiences and giving people the opportunity to engage in the story versus just hitting them with a ton of artifacts. And again, it's a generational sort of situation. You know, people of my generation are used to going into a museum and looking and reading, and the more stuff, the better. But I did observe in the past in the galleries at the Adirondack Museum, which was our old name, people sometimes walking through and just sort of, you know, skating through the galleries, as it were, because their eyes glaze over after a while. Whereas if you vary the experience, then here's a video, and here's some artifacts, and here's a hands-on interactive of some kind, that increases what we call staying time in the business and gives people more of an opportunity to absorb the story.
And Life in the Adirondacks opened the 1st of July. What's been the response from the public?
It's been very good. It's been very good. Visitation is up, and one of the things that we're most gratified by is the number of young families that we're seeing. We are seeing more than we have in the past, and more baby strollers on the campus. And one of the objectives of this whole project was to reach out to younger audiences. You know, we have a wonderful group of people who are older and dedicated museum goers who come to the museum all the time. But to get those new and young people in is very gratifying, because we want to reach out to them with the Adirondack story. And so it's terrific to see them in there and playing with and interacting with the new exhibits. It's all happening just as we had hoped it would, so it's great to see it actually happening.
And we talked about your collections. You're constantly updating that. In fact, just within the past couple of weeks, we saw where an iconic sign in Warrensburg that many people who have driven from Chestertown down Route 9 into Warrensburg have seen the anti-APA sign on the side of a house. And why did you decide that that was enough of an iconic sign that it should be part of the Adirondack Experience Museum?
Well, that's an interesting story. You know, I saw that sign when I first came to the Adirondacks, and I immediately thought, we need to have that sign because it expresses an opinion. It's one that obviously not everybody would agree with, but it expresses an opinion. And the Adirondacks are a place where there have always been sort of interesting exchanges of opinions on different issues. And when you're looking at sort of political disputes or land use issues, there aren't a lot of artifacts when you get right down to it. Occasionally there are protest signs, but the fact that people can disagree over policy, it doesn't produce artifacts. You know, there are T-shirts on occasion, or buttons, or as I said, protest signs, but to have this enormous sign that's 9 feet by 9 feet that says APA with a slash through it is really rather remarkable. So we got the sign, we got cans of paint that were used to paint the sign. We got some T-shirts that went along with the protests that, you know, surrounded some actions that the people who put up the sign were involved with. And one of the great stories about that sign is that when it went up, apparently town officials in Warrensburg said, well, you know, he's going to have to get a permit. Well, guess what? Didn't happen. And the sign was up for 15 years without a permit. And the owner was thinking the time had come to either repaint it or, you know, do something. And he thought that the proper place for it would be in the Adirondack Experience. So we now have it in our conservation studio, and we'll be doing a little work on it, and within the next couple of weeks it'll be mounted in the exhibit.